Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
I used to think betrayal came with warning signs. A shift in tone, a look that lingers too long or not at all. But the truth is, it hits you when you're not braced for it, when your guard is down and your hands are full of hope. That Thursday afternoon, I had just come back from lunch with a vendor, still humming a tune from the radio when I decided to check the joint account. It was routine. I liked seeing the number rise slowly over the years, like a plant you watered faithfully, waiting for the bloom. That day, though, the screen didn't greet me with the usual comfort. It greeted me with a void. $0. I blinked, refreshed. Again. 0. The cursor blinked back at me, almost smug. My hands went cold, my stomach knotted. For a minute, I thought it had to be a glitch, some bank error or temporary system failure. But the transaction history confirmed it. A withdrawal. All of it. Gone. I stood up so fast my chair screeched across the tile. My mind was racing, my breath shallow. I was already dialing her number before I realized I didn't want to hear her voice through a speaker. I needed to see her. Face to face. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Each red light felt like a cruel delay, each honk from a driver behind me like static in my chest. I was rehearsing explanations in my head, all of them built on the idea that this was some kind of mistake. Maybe Celia had moved the money for a good reason, a surprise, even. I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to. But when I walked through the front door and saw her out on the patio, wine glass in hand, legs crossed, and a content smile on her face, that belief began to wither. She looked up as I stepped outside, her eyes flicking to my trembling hands, to the keys I dropped on the glass table. Something wrong? She asked, swirling the wine like we were at a tasting event. What happened to the money? I asked, my voice strained, like it had traveled through 100 layers of disbelief to get out. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just smiled wider and took a sip. Oh, she said, as if I'd asked her about the weather. My heart pounded in my ears. Celia, where is it? She set the glass down slowly, deliberately. Then she looked me dead in the eye and said, thanks for your naivety. I didn't move. I don't even think I breathed. She stood, walking toward me with that self-assured strut I once found magnetic. You really thought we were building something together? She asked, cocking her head. You and your dreams of land and legacy. That whole, let's build a future thing? That was your fantasy, not mine. My mouth went dry. You took it all? She lifted the wine glass again in a mock toast. Every penny. And don't worry, it's not being wasted. Mason and I have big plans. And thanks to you, we can finally start them. Mason. The name hit like a slap. I'd heard it once or twice, but never paid attention. A coworker, she said. A friend from her gym. Now it felt like a punchline to a sick joke. I should have cried, should have yelled. But instead, something unexpected happened. I laughed. At first it was small, a breathy, disbelieving exhale. Then it grew. A chuckle, a grin, and finally a laugh that echoed off the walls, full and deep and startling even to me. Her face twisted. What the hell is so funny? I wiped a tear from the corner of my eye, still smiling. You really think you won, don't you? She frowned, lowering her glass. What are you talking about? I shook my head, still chuckling as I walked past her. You'll see. She followed me into the house, but I was already upstairs, grabbing the file I kept hidden in the back of my closet. A folder she'd never bothered to notice. I didn't open it. Not yet. Just held it in my hand like a quiet reminder of every long night, every careful plan. She thought she gutted me. And to be fair, for a split second, she did. But what she didn't know, what she never bothered to see, was that the man she thought was naive had stopped trusting her months ago. That the money she took wasn't the treasure. It was the decoy. The real legacy? Still untouched? Untouched and untouchable. That's the thing about betrayal. When you see it coming, you can turn it into strategy. She took the bait. And I had 10 years of patience, savings, and quiet observation to thank for that. So as she stood in the hallway with that confused sneer on her face, I didn't give her another word. I just smiled, walked into my home office, and shut the door behind me. Let her feel victorious. For now, the game had only just begun. Celia wasn't always a villain. At least, not one you could spot easily. She had that polished smile, the kind that could disarm anyone at a dinner party. The first time we met, it was at a bookstore downtown. She was standing in the self-help section, thumbing through something about confidence and success. I joked that she didn't look like someone who needed improvement, and she laughed, a real one, the kind that echoed. I remember thinking I'd stumbled into something rare. She had ambition in her voice and elegance in her posture. She talked about her dreams of travel, fashion, influence, and a curated lifestyle filled with meaning and champagne. I thought we were on the same page. We weren't. At first, we aligned on the surface. Matching routines, late-night conversations about the future, the little traditions that feel like threads weaving two lives into one. But early on, she began testing the seams of those threads. When the bills started arriving and the honeymoon phase was wearing thin, I noticed her avoidance. She'd swipe her card for the lavish brunches but leave the rent untouched. She'd light up our social media with staged photos of weekend getaways, all paid for with my overtime bonuses. I told myself it was a phase. That once we were settled, she'd step in, take on the weight with me. We were building something, weren't we? A life, a future? So I took on more. I became the guy who stayed late, who freelanced on weekends, who figured out how to turn our basement into a passive income suite just to offset the endless spending. I didn't complain. I was raised to believe love required sacrifice, that good men shoulder the burden without needing applause. I wore that belief like armor, but the longer I carried it, the more it felt like chains. Celia, meanwhile, leaned deeper into illusion. Her Instagram was a theater. Date nights meticulously photographed, gifts posed before she even opened them. And yet behind those glossy images, our reality was hollow. I'd come home from 12-hour shifts to find her glassy-eyed on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling through influencers who lived lives she was desperate to mimic. She'd talk about upgrading our furniture while I sat on the floor calculating our utilities. Every conversation about budgeting ended in silence, or worse, sarcasm. "Don't be such a martyr," she once snapped when I brought up the need to tighten our spending. "You act like you're the only one who sacrifices." But she never showed me hers. I handled the mortgage, car payments, repairs, groceries, insurance. Every time something broke, I fixed it. Every time we needed a solution, I researched, budgeted, made it happen. "Celia?" She smiled for the pictures. And over time, even that smile became transactional. Cold. Calculated. Looking back, I think I started losing her the moment I stopped being her fantasy. I wasn't exotic or reckless. I was dependable. And dependable, to her, meant boring. She wanted the champagne life, and I was the guy pouring the water to keep us afloat. I thought she was bored. I thought she wanted excitement, some spark we'd lost along the way. So I leaned in harder, took her on trips, bought her things I couldn't afford. I even started learning about fashion trends just to show her I cared about the things she loved. But none of it brought her back. What I didn't know then was that she'd already found her escape route, and I was funding it. I remember the first time I sensed something was wrong. She got a text and her face changed. Not in fear or guilt, but with that soft smile people make when they read something from someone they shouldn't be talking to. She tucked her phone away too quickly, her eyes not meeting mine. When I asked who it was, she said it was Tasha from yoga. But Celia hadn't been to yoga in 2 months. Then there were the late-night phone calls. Whispered, muffled through a closed bathroom door. Perfume that lingered even when she was supposedly just going to the grocery store. A change in her wardrobe. Shorter skirts, newer bags, all mysteriously acquired without dipping into the budget we supposedly shared. I started checking our expenses. Quietly. She didn't notice. Or maybe she thought I wouldn't dare question her. That's when I saw the shift. Money being funneled to accounts I didn't recognize. Charges for Uber rides in neighborhoods she had no reason to be in. Small charges at first, easy to miss. But I didn't miss them. That was when the illusion cracked for good. I realized I had never been her partner. I had been her foundation, her financier. The dependable man she built her fantasy on top of, like a castle on rented land. I wasn't a husband in her eyes. I was the engine. And once she found someone else who made her feel something new, no matter how unstable, she was ready to trade me in. It wasn't just betrayal. It was calculation. So I started planning too. I funneled most of my savings, everything I'd been working toward for a decade, into an account she didn't know about. One registered under a trust impossible for her to access without explicit permission. In the joint account, I left enough to look legitimate. Enough to bait the trap. Because if she was already half gone, I needed to know just how far she was willing to go. And I needed proof. In the quiet hours when she slept, I installed software, nothing invasive or illegal, just enough to track activity on our shared laptop. I monitored the messages, the emails, The spreadsheets she thought she was clever enough to hide in folders labeled tax stuff. And each time she typed Mason's name, I felt the illusion dissolve further. It wasn't just emotional. It was premeditated, strategic. And yet she still wore the mask, still kissed me on the cheek, still smiled for photos, still said, "I love you," when it fit the script. But her performance was flawed, and I'd stopped being the audience. Celia thought she was operating in the shadows. But the truth? I was watching the whole time, not out of vengeance. Out of necessity. Because the man she thought she could play? He'd already stepped out of the illusion, and the real game had only just begun. You don't spend a decade building a future without learning how to protect it. By the time the signs of betrayal started showing, I was already tired of pretending not to see, tired of excusing the obvious. But I didn't confront Celia right away. I knew her. Confrontation would only make her pivot, adjust, bury the truth deeper. No, if I wanted to see the full extent of what she was doing, I needed to be quiet. Strategic. I had built a life with her, but now I had to build a trap. It started with the money. I had spent years saving, managing contracts, working double shifts, cutting corners where I could. Our dream, at least I thought it was ours, had always been a home with land. Not some sterile condo, not a temporary stop, but something lasting, something solid. We talked about where to hang the wind chimes, how many steps it would take from the porch to the apple tree I wanted to plant. I held on to those dreams longer than I should have. But once the whispers and the lies began to float through our house like smoke, I knew I had to protect what I had left. 8 months ago, I opened a new account. Not just a simple savings account either. This one was under a trust name, with a financial advisor who owed me a favor and kept everything paperless and discreet. The name on it wasn't mine. Not directly. It was something only I could access, using a combination of biometric ID and 2 layers of encryption. I moved $450,000 there in increments so the transfers wouldn't raise suspicion. Our joint account still held $40,000. That's what I left for her to find. A believable sum. Enough to think it was everything. I remember the first time I thought of setting a trap. I was sitting at our kitchen table, watching Celia across from me. She was sipping coffee, scrolling on her phone, laughing at some meme she wouldn't share with me. Her eyes sparkled, but not in my direction. Not for me. That was when it hit me. Whatever she had been planning, she thought she was smarter than me. She thought I was predictable, naive, safe. I used to see that as a compliment, being the steady one, the responsible one. But now I realized she saw it as an opportunity, a weakness. So I leaned into it. I pretended to be as blind as ever. I nodded along when she talked about trips she wanted to take someday, babe, maybe the Amalfi Coast. I let her make purchases I knew were for someone else, lingerie that never showed up in our bedroom, gift bags that vanished before I saw what was inside. I stopped asking questions. Instead, I started gathering. I installed software on our shared laptop. I made sure it was legal. I wasn't trying to do anything shady, just track the activity on a machine I also used. It recorded keystrokes, logged emails, and mirrored messages sent through her desktop versions of apps. I told myself it was for peace of mind, but deep down, I knew what I would find. And I did. Mason. The name appeared again and again. Not in code, not hidden. Just there. Blatant. Arrogant. Their messages were always tinged with cruelty, jokes about how clueless I was, fantasies about what they'd do with my money once the plan went through. He called her Queen C. She called him my freedom. They talked about beaches and startups, crypto schemes and fake IDs. He wasn't just some rebound or distraction. He was her ticket out. And I was the one paying for it. I could have ended it there. Printed out the logs, thrown them on the kitchen table, demanded answers. But I didn't. I wasn't interested in her excuses. I was interested in something else, clarity. I needed to know how far she was willing to go. I needed to see what she would do if she thought I was truly gone. So I planned a business trip. A fake one. I told her I'd be out of town for 3 days, meeting with clients across the state. I even packed a suitcase, kissed her on the cheek, and drove to a hotel on the other side of town. Checked in under a different name. Stayed quiet. I monitored everything. The first day, nothing happened. She ordered Thai food. Called her sister. Took a long bath. Normal. But on the second day, she logged into the joint account. I watched it in real time. She clicked through the balance. Then the transactions. Then, withdrawal. She didn't even hesitate. $40,000. Gone in one bold move. She called Mason the same hour. They laughed about it. They didn't know I was recording every word. And then, that night, something unexpected happened. I received a text alert from another bank, one I hadn't used in months. Someone had tried and failed to access the trust account. 3 times. Wrong credentials. It was subtle, but it confirmed what I suspected. She knew there was more. She just didn't know how to reach it. Mason must have pushed her. Greedy people never stop at one score. They want it all. That failed access attempt? It told me everything. She wasn't just planning to leave. She was planning to gut me first. And still, I waited. Because now the game had rules. Now I had leverage. She thought the $40,000 was her golden ticket, but in reality, it was bait, tagged, traceable, and already flagged by my bank. She hadn't stolen the prize. She'd walked right into the fire. I spent the 3rd night in that hotel room reviewing the evidence. Emails, screenshots, account logs. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about closure, about making sure she couldn't do to someone else what she did to me. I compiled it all into a folder, digital and physical. And I added one more thing, a spreadsheet, meticulously labeled, outlining every suspicious activity tied to her over the last year. By the time I checked out the next morning, I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't heartbroken or confused. I was ready. Celia had made her move. And now, it was time for mine. She thought she knew me. But the man she betrayed? He'd been replaced by someone she never even bothered to understand. And that man? He was about to turn the page. She took the bait like a fish too eager to notice the glint of the hook. That Wednesday afternoon, while I sat comfortably in a quiet hotel room 30 minutes away, Celia thought she was pulling off the greatest heist of her life. I watched her do it from my laptop, tracking every click, every transaction. First, she logged into our joint account and transferred all $40,000 in one swift move. No hesitation, no second thoughts. She didn't even break it into smaller chunks to mask the theft. It was bold, arrogant, a move made by someone who truly believed they were smarter than everyone else. She moved the money into what I assumed was a private account. Her name was on it, though. That part was important. I made sure she had equal access to that money so that when this reached the courts, there would be no room for ambiguity. It wasn't just theft. It was documented, traceable, and fully intentional. After the transfer, she called Mason. Their voices came through my headphones, crisp and clear thanks to the synced laptop mic. "It's done," she said, almost singing. 40 grand, baby. That's our jumpstart. Mason's laugh was nasal, grating. Told you it would work. The guy practically begged to be robbed. I bet he's still out there thinking you're baking cookies for his return. Celia giggled. He thinks I'm waiting at home with wine and a foot rub. Idiot. I didn't flinch. I didn't throw anything or scream. I just wrote down the timestamp on the recording. It was strange how calm I was. Maybe because I'd already grieved the relationship in silence months ago. Maybe because I had suspected it for so long that the confirmation was more satisfying than devastating. Whatever it was, I felt nothing. Not pain. Not regret. Just clarity. They thought I was powerless. That I'd walk into the house in a few days, open the bank app, and fall to my knees in shock. That I'd beg for answers, demand to know why. But I had already played that scene out in my head 100 times. And in none of them did I grovel. What I hadn't expected, however, was the alert I got that evening from one of my firewall dummy accounts. It was the kind of account most people wouldn't even know existed, a breadcrumb trail I'd set up to lure someone exactly like Celia. She tried logging into it 3 times. Her attempts were clumsy, wrong security answers, typos in the email. She was digging, searching for more. Which meant Mason had gotten greedy. He must have convinced her there was more buried somewhere. He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't right either. Celia didn't know about the trust. She had no idea that the real money, the $450,000 I'd spent 10 years saving, was safe, tucked away under a different name and structure she couldn't penetrate. She thought she had cleaned me out, stripped me down to zero. But all she had done was show her hand. It got even more surreal when I watched her Google search how to access hidden spouse accounts and crypto transfers that can't be traced. They weren't even trying to be subtle. Mason had convinced her they were brilliant, 2 masterminds living out some heist movie fantasy. Meanwhile, I was sitting in sweatpants, sipping cheap hotel coffee, cataloging their crimes like a court clerk. I even took screenshots of her search history, just in case. That night, she cooked dinner. I watched her through the security cam I'd installed in the corner of our living room months earlier. The footage had no audio, but I could see her humming, stirring pasta, sipping wine, acting. She plated 2 servings and set the table like I'd be home at any moment. Then she sat, checking her phone every 5 minutes, probably wondering when I'd see the account balance and call her frantic. I never did. Instead, I texted her just before bed. Long day. Turning in early. See you Friday. She replied instantly. Miss you. Can't wait to see you. Be safe. I stared at her words and smiled, not because I believed them, but because I finally understood the depth of her performance. Every emoji, every pet name, every love you she'd sent over the last few months, it had all been part of a game she thought she was winning. She didn't realize the board was tilted. The next morning, I made a call to my bank liaison, quietly flagged the transaction from the joint account and confirmed it had been logged under suspicious activity. Then I called a friend in cybersecurity to pull the IP logs of her attempt to breach the dummy account. More evidence. More fuel for the storm I was preparing. Meanwhile, Celia went on like nothing had happened. She posted a photo that morning, her holding a coffee mug with a caption that read, "Trust your gut. It knows before you do." The irony nearly made me choke on my drink. Mason stayed mostly in the shadows, but I tracked his crypto wallet. He tried to route the funds into Bitcoin, then quickly moved them to a lesser-known coin. Typical amateur mistake, thinking the blockchain is invisible when it's just a bigger paper trail in disguise. The funniest part? Mason had a record. I'd pulled it weeks ago. Petty fraud, DUI, and 2 counts of obstruction. Celia didn't do her homework. She traded a man with 10 years of love, patience, and investment for a DJ with a rap sheet and a leased BMW. By the time I checked out of the hotel Friday morning, I had everything I needed. Video footage, audio recordings, transaction logs, IP traces, and most importantly, calm. I felt cleaner than I had in months. The anger had burned off. The heartbreak had dissolved. All that was left was purpose. I drove home slow, enjoying the familiar streets with new eyes. The house stood the same as always, beige, quiet, orderly. I parked, walked in through the side door, and set my bag down like any man returning from a work trip. Celia came out of the kitchen smiling like she hadn't gutted our account 3 days ago. "How was the trip?" she asked, voice sweet like poisoned honey. "Exhausting," I said, kissing her cheek. "We had dinner. Watched half a movie." She laughed at all the right scenes, touched my hand gently. She was still acting, still unaware that the curtain was about to drop. I said good night early, blaming jet lag. She stayed up, probably texting Mason. I didn't care. Because now, I wasn't just a husband trying to save a marriage. I was a man who had seen the full betrayal and survived it. And the reckoning was next. The morning sunlight filtered in through the curtains like any other day, soft and indifferent, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the slivers of light dance across my shoes as I tied the laces. Celia was still asleep when I left the room, draped in her silk robe like a statue of serenity. She had no idea what was coming. No idea that I had spent the last few days assembling every piece of her betrayal into something sharp, undeniable, and surgically precise. I waited until evening, not out of cruelty, but because I wanted the moment to land with all the weight it deserved. I moved through the day with methodical patience, watered the plants, replied to emails, took a walk around the neighborhood, nodding to familiar faces. From the outside, nothing looked out of place. I was still the quiet, dependable man who had built this life brick by brick. But inside, I was gathering momentum. At 6:30 p.m., I opened a bottle of wine. Her favorite, Cabernet from a vineyard she'd once begged me to visit. I set the table, lit a candle, even folded the napkins the way she liked, tucked under the plates with the silverware aligned just so. Presentation mattered to Celia. She had always been a sucker for theatrics, for scenes that looked like perfection. So I gave her one. She came down the stairs around 7, wearing a dress I hadn't seen in months. It hugged her like a second skin, the neckline chosen with calculation. She paused in the doorway, surprised. "What's all this?" I smiled, slow and measured. "Thought we could celebrate. I'm back. The trip's done. Everything handled." She tilted her head, reading me, trying to decipher my tone. But I kept it light, easy. Pulled out her chair, poured her wine, and toasted to new beginnings. She clinked her glass to mine with the kind of grace that belonged in a rom-com. "New beginnings," she echoed. We ate in silence for a few minutes, forks clinking, wine being sipped. She made small talk about her day, asked about the trip, even cracked a joke about how I must have missed her cooking. I nodded, offering enough responses to keep the illusion intact. Then, just as I topped off her wine for the third time, I looked her in the eye and said, "Have you checked the account lately?" Her hand paused midair, the glass just inches from her lips. "What do you mean?" I leaned back in my chair, casually swirling the wine. "The joint account. You've been into it recently, haven't you?" There was a flicker in her eyes. Not fear yet, but awareness. A twitch at the corner of her mouth, a subtle shift in posture. "Why are you asking?" "Because," I said, setting the glass down carefully, "I think you already know the answer." That's when the mask cracked. Just a bit. She smirked, lowered her glass, and rested her elbow on the table. "You mean the one that doesn't exist anymore?" she said. "Yeah, I checked it. Pretty generous of you, actually." Her eyes glinted with something like triumph. I smiled back, calm and unshaken. "You're welcome." She laughed, mocking, haughty, like someone who believed she just won the lottery. "Mason and I really needed that final boost," she said, swirling her glass. "You know, to start fresh. Somewhere new. You basically gave us the runway." I chuckled softly, shaking my head. "You really believe you got away with it?" She cocked her head. "Didn't I?" That's when I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper. Thick stock, neatly printed. No markings except a simple title at the top, "The Real Account." I slid it across the table, watched her eyes narrow as she reached for it. She unfolded the sheet with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Then her face went blank. The balance was printed in bold, $450,000.67. The account name was unfamiliar. The transaction history showed a single monthly deposit, my deposits. No withdrawals. No links to her name. I let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. "That's where the real money is," I said. "The account you never knew existed. The one you tried to access and couldn't." She stared at the paper, blinking slowly, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into a lie. But they didn't. They were steady, unflinching. "That $40,000 you took?" I continued, voice low and precise. "It was bait. Just enough to tempt you. Just enough to test how far you'd go. And you went further than I thought." Her hand trembled slightly as she set the paper down. You set me up?" "No," I said, standing now. "You set yourself up. I just gave you the stage." She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. I reached for my phone and tapped the screen. A recording played, her voice unmistakable. "He's too trusting. By the time he notices, Mason and I will be long gone." The sound filled the room, every syllable crisp and damning. Her face drained of color. I paused the recording and looked at her, really looked at her. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the person I had built a future with. This was someone else entirely. Someone cold, opportunistic, hollow. "Why?" I asked, not because I needed the answer, but because I wanted to hear her say it. She didn't speak. Just stared at the paper, then the phone, then back at me. Her confidence had vanished. In its place was something rawer fear. I moved toward the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder. Inside were screenshots, transaction logs, message printouts. A tidy package of betrayal. I dropped it on the table beside her plate. "That's for the lawyer," I said. Still, she said nothing. Her breath came in shallow pulls, her eyes flicking toward the door like a trapped animal. "You thought I wouldn't find out," I said softly. "You thought I'd crumble. But you don't get to destroy someone and walk away clean. Not anymore." I walked to the living room, leaving her at the table with her ruined fantasy. I heard her whisper something. I didn't care what. Regret, apology, denial. It didn't matter. The reveal was done. The truth was out. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The dinner we shared that night? It wasn't a celebration. It was a funeral for the illusion. And I was done mourning. I didn't expect her to speak at first. She sat there frozen, the flickering candlelight casting long, warped shadows across her face. Her hand hovered near the wine glass she no longer sipped from, her fingers trembling slightly, as if the weight of what she'd read, heard, and realized all landed at once and cracked her spine in 3 places. I didn't feel pity. Not anymore. I had shed every drop of that emotion during the weeks I spent tracing her betrayal. Tonight, I was done being the man she once thought too soft to notice. She finally looked up. Her eyes were glassy but dry. "I don't understand," she whispered. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded across my chest. "Sure you do," I said calmly. "You just don't want to admit how much you underestimated me." I thought. You said the joint account was everything, she stammered. All our savings. No, I replied. You assumed it was. Because you assumed I was exactly who you wanted me to be. Trusting, loyal, stupid. You took that $40,000 like a thief sprinting out of an unlocked house, thinking you just robbed the vault. She blinked at me, the cogs in her mind visibly spinning. So the real account was never yours to find, I interrupted. It's under a trust. One you'd never think to look for because it's built around everything you ignored about me. My patience, my foresight, my discipline. She flinched at that last word. She used to mock those qualities. Called me boring when I turned down vacations so we could reach our goals faster. Called me obsessive when I tracked expenses down to the cent. But those habits? They built the fortress she couldn't breach. Her mouth opened, then closed. I waited. She tried again. So all of this, setting me up, baiting me, it was some kind of revenge? I shook my head slowly. No, it was self-defense. You plotted to steal everything I'd worked for. You spent months lying to my face, using my money to take your boyfriend on vacations while pretending we were still a team. The trap didn't create your betrayal, it revealed it. Then I stepped forward and laid the final blow. I opened my phone again, scrolled to a folder labeled Confession, and hit play. Her voice filled the room, again. This time it wasn't the snide comment about me being too trusting. It was her conversation with Mason 2 nights ago. Once he's out of the picture, we'll drain whatever's left. He's still got accounts I haven't cracked yet. Mason, we're this close. I let it play all the way through. Celia's face contorted. A mixture of panic, rage, and disbelief twisted across her features. You were spying on me? You were planning a heist, I countered. I had the legal right to monitor activity on our shared devices. Every message, every voice memo, every attempt to breach the dummy accounts, all recorded, all admissible. She stood then, pushing the chair back violently. This is insane. You're insane. No, Celia, I said evenly, unmoving. I'm prepared. For once, I played by your rules. Her shoulders heaved as her voice rose. You're acting like I'm the villain. Do you know what it's like living with someone who's obsessed with numbers and plans and boring futures? You sucked the air out of this marriage long before Mason ever came along. I nodded slowly. So instead of leaving like an adult, you plotted to empty our accounts, disappear with him, and leave me holding the rubble. That's your justification. She threw her hands up. You don't get it. You never made me feel alive anymore. I smiled then, genuinely, not out of amusement, but recognition. There it was. The unvarnished truth. Celia hadn't wanted a partner. She wanted a pedestal. She wanted me to fuel her lifestyle, her fantasies, and when I stopped being useful, she tried to erase me. I understand perfectly, I said. You wanted me silent, compliant, and blind. But now you're standing in a house you thought was yours, looking at a man you thought you could use forever. And guess what, Celia? You're wrong on both counts. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. Maybe I'd spent so long trying to preserve the peace that I forgot to let her see what I was capable of. The real me. The one who didn't just survive betrayal, but planned for it. I walked past her to the drawer by the kitchen and pulled out a thick envelope. Here, I said, handing it to her. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside, a divorce petition already filed. A copy of the Asset Protection Trust registration. A notarized letter stating that all funds in the joint account had been reported as suspicious and traced. And finally, a letter from my attorney outlining the charges being pursued: identity theft, attempted wire fraud, and civil restitution. She dropped it like it burned her fingers. You're actually doing this? I already did. For a moment, she looked like she might cry. But the tears never came. Maybe she realized they wouldn't work. Maybe she realized she'd cried wolf one too many times. I gave you everything, I said, my voice low but firm. And you sold it for cheap thrills and a man who DJs in clubs with sticky floors. You think I'm the villain for protecting myself? She didn't answer. And so, with one final breath, I said it. You took the wrong bait. You always were chasing the illusion of more. But the real wealth? The real value? It was in the man you betrayed. I walked out then, left her standing in the dining room with a cold dinner, a burning envelope, and the ashes of everything she thought she'd won. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I didn't need to. The trap had been set. The line had been crossed. And now, justice was coming. The morning after I served her the envelope, the house was quiet. No footsteps. No perfume trails leading to the bathroom. No staged breakfast table with just the right amount of lighting for her Instagram stories. Celia was gone. She hadn't taken her clothes or her shoes. Just her phone, a duffel bag, and her favorite pair of sunglasses, the one she wore when she thought she looked powerful. Let her have them. The real power had already shifted. At 9 a.m., I stepped into the downtown office of Iris Delgado, my attorney. The elevator ride up felt like climbing out of a grave I hadn't realized I'd been living in for the past 2 years. Iris had been recommended by an old colleague, someone who told me she specialized in messes like mine. And he wasn't wrong. She didn't greet me with sympathy or fake concern. She simply pushed a folder across the desk and said, "Let's make this clean and permanent." I had already sent her the files, every screenshot, every audio clip, every withdrawal record, every failed login attempt. She had them sorted by date and labeled with ruthless efficiency. "She's not just guilty of theft," Iris said, flipping through the folder. "She's guilty of intent, premeditation, and digital fraud." I nodded. "And Mason?" Iris's lips thinned. "Accessory. Multiple counts." And he attempted to route funds into a cryptocurrency wallet tied to a flagged exchange. That crosses state lines, so it's federal now. We've already alerted authorities. He'll be on the radar by tomorrow morning, if he's not already. It felt surreal, hearing my pain translated into legal terminology. But it was also freeing. Everything she and Mason had whispered, planned, and executed was now documented, filed, and set in motion like a machine they couldn't stop. Iris leaned back in her chair. "We're filing for divorce under breach of fiduciary duty, financial abuse, and marital fraud. We're freezing any remaining shared assets today. She won't be able to touch anything moving forward. And the house? You bought it. Titles in your name only. That stays with you." It was the one place I had feared losing, not for its monetary value, but for what it symbolized. I had spent years picturing my life with Celia in that home, years convincing myself that if I built her a castle, she'd learn how to be a queen. But she'd never wanted the role. She wanted the throne, the power, and none of the loyalty. Iris passed me a pen. "Sign here. We'll file with the court before noon." I signed. My name came out clean. No tremor in my hand. Just resolve. That afternoon, the real storm began. By 3 p.m., Celia's accounts had been frozen. The funds she had tried to route from the joint account were reversed under fraud provisions. The small victories began stacking. The landlord of the apartment Mason had supposedly rented under a fake name was contacted. Apparently, he had vanished, left behind a half-paid deposit and a broken window. He wasn't slick. He was stupid and loud. The authorities didn't even need to look hard. His crypto wallet, tied to a flagged transaction from our joint account, sent up enough red flags to summon a battalion. 3 days later, he was picked up at a gas station in Jacksonville, Florida, trying to buy a burner phone. U.S. Marshals had him in cuffs before he finished pumping gas. They found a flash drive in his backpack with a digital paper trail of attempted crypto laundering and a badly written plan to relocate to Bali. Mason wasn't a mastermind. He was a fantasy Celia clung to when she wanted to feel like she'd outgrown me. Celia tried to go underground for a bit. She didn't contact me directly. No apology. No confrontation. Just silence. She must have figured staying quiet was her best play. Let things cool down, re-emerge with a new sob story, and hope the courts didn't push too hard. But Iris wasn't going to let that happen. We filed a criminal complaint for unauthorized access to a protected account. The paper trail was airtight. Every login attempt, every transfer, every password reset she initiated without permission. Digital fingerprints everywhere. It was enough to trigger state-level fraud charges, and once Mason was booked. He said Celia had told him I was emotionally abusive, that I was hiding money, that she deserved to take back what was rightfully hers. He tried to make himself sound like a misguided hero, but his phone records, emails, and the timing of the withdrawals told a different story. He was complicit. And worse, he was stupid enough to leave it all unencrypted. Iris and I met again a week later to prepare for the hearing. She laid everything out. She's going to claim she was misled, that Mason manipulated her, that she was a confused, emotional wife trying to reclaim her independence. And that'll work? I asked. Iris smiled like a shark. It'll work about as well as throwing a paper umbrella at a hurricane. Celia had no leverage. The trust account was legally sound. The audio clips were clear. The money had been restored, but the intent behind the theft remained. And with the court now looped in, her image as the misunderstood wife wasn't going to fly. When I walked into the courtroom for the preliminary hearing, she looked like a ghost of the woman I had married. Her hair tied back tight, no makeup, clothes modest and subdued. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a woman under pressure, manipulated by an external force. Mason had already taken a plea deal, leaving her out to dry. It didn't matter how much her attorney tried to shift the blame. Everything pointed back to her choices. The judge asked one question that sealed her fate. Was this before or after you attempted to access your husband's private financial accounts multiple times using false credentials? Her silence was all the answer the court needed. By the time the hearing wrapped, she had been ordered to repay damages, forfeit any spousal claim, and prepare for a formal fraud trial. The divorce would proceed with her having no access to my assets, no right to my retirement, and no place in the house she once posed in for her curated social life. I didn't celebrate. There was no gloating, just a quiet exhale, the kind that came from finally standing on solid ground again. When I stepped out of that courtroom, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a survivor. And more than that, I felt like I had finally reclaimed my own story. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in energy, a sterile kind of stillness, like everything inside those walls was engineered to remove the warmth from human moments. I sat in the hallway outside courtroom 2B, watching Celia and her attorney whisper at the other end of the bench. She didn't look at me. Not once. Not even when she knew I was staring right at her. She was dressed in navy blue, likely told by her lawyer it would look somber, non-confrontational. Her makeup was toned down, no red lipstick, no smoky eyes. Just pale lips and mascara she thought might draw sympathy. I almost laughed. This was the same woman who used to spend an hour getting ready for brunch. Now she wanted to look like the victim. Iris Delgado, my attorney, sat beside me, calm as always. She tapped the edge of her file with a pen, flipping through tab sections like she was organizing a recipe binder. I asked her once if court made her nervous. She'd said, "Only when I know I'm bluffing." And we weren't bluffing. The bailiff called us in. The judge, a woman named Brennan with sharp glasses and an even sharper tone, was already seated when we entered. She didn't bother with small talk. Just the facts, please. My kind of person. Celia's lawyer started the opening volley. He went for sympathy. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Rowe, is a woman who believed she was in a secure, loving partnership. She was misled, manipulated emotionally and financially. When she took action, it wasn't out of greed. It was out of desperation and betrayal. Betrayal. That word landed heavy. I heard it, and my jaw flexed before I could stop it. I bit down on my tongue, not because I believed her, but because I couldn't believe he was actually saying it with a straight face. Then he pivoted to Mason. The co-conspirator in question, Mr. Reeves, was a bad influence, an opportunist. He took advantage of Mrs. Rowe's vulnerable emotional state. Her actions, while not defensible, were not calculated malice. They were the byproduct of psychological manipulation. Celia lowered her eyes, as if she'd been coached to do it at that exact moment. It was a performance, and part of me almost admired the coordination. But Iris didn't flinch. When it was our turn, she stood like a seasoned fencer, poised for a single precise strike. Your Honor, she began, we're not here to debate emotional distress. We're here to examine evidence. And the evidence is overwhelming. She handed over Exhibit A compiled transcript of the key messages exchanged between Celia and Mason over the course of 6 months. Color-coded, dated, and backed up by forensic timestamps. No embellishments, just their words. Then came the audio. Your Honor, if I may, we have recordings captured from a shared laptop between Mr. and Mrs. Rowe. Under the state's co-ownership laws and mutual consent to device access, the recordings are admissible. The judge nodded. Proceed. The courtroom speakers played her voice. Clear. Cold. I didn't even need to watch Celia's face. I kept my eyes on the judge. Once he's out of the picture, we'll drain whatever's left. Mason, we're this close. The judge's brows didn't move. She just said, play the next one. He's too trusting. I've already got access to the joint account. Once he's gone, I'll pull everything and we vanish. Celia's lawyer objected, said the recordings lacked context. Iris raised a brow. We have full transcripts. All 36 hours. The judge gestured. Overruled. By the time we introduced the screen recordings of Celia's failed login attempts to the trust account, the courtroom felt suffocating with her guilt. The timestamps lined up with my GPS track location. I was out of town. She was home, entering the wrong credentials over and over again. Iris delivered the final blow with calm brutality. Your Honor, this wasn't the act of a distressed wife. This was premeditated financial fraud, carried out with precision. She wasn't a victim. She was the architect. Celia's eyes had gone glassy. Her hands were clenched, white-knuckled on her lap. Still, she hadn't looked at me. That, I noticed more than anything else. She couldn't meet the eyes of the man she tried to hollow out and replace. The judge leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Rowe, you stated in your deposition that your actions were spontaneous and emotionally reactive. Would you like to revise that statement now, given the evidence? Her lawyer whispered something quickly in her ear. Celia cleared her throat. I didn't know it would get this far, she said. I just wanted to feel like I had control of something. It was the closest she'd come to admitting guilt. Judge Brennan nodded slowly. Intent matters, but so does action. And the actions taken here were deliberate, repeated, and concealed. You didn't just breach your husband's trust. You attempted to reroute marital assets, collaborated with a third party, and accessed protected accounts under false pretenses. She turned to the court clerk. Criminal fraud charges will move forward as recommended by the DA's office. As for the divorce petition and asset division, that's when it landed. Mrs. Rowe is to forfeit all spousal claims. No alimony. No share of the protected trust. Restitution of the $40,000 is ordered in full. Personal property is to be returned within 7 business days, under officer supervision. Any delay will result in further charges. Celia broke then. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a silent tear, a tremor in her jaw, a collapse of posture. And I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt something closer to stillness. A quiet end to a chapter that had tried to bury me. Outside the courtroom, Iris shook my hand. Well played, she said. It wasn't a game, I replied. But in some ways, it was. A game she thought I didn't know I was playing. A game she lost the moment she assumed I was too soft to fight back. And now, the board was clear. The queen had fallen. And I was walking away without a single piece missing. 3 weeks after the final hearing, I stood in front of a small, 2-story craftsman tucked into the edge of a quiet neighborhood, keys in hand, the deed folded neatly in the glove compartment of my truck. There were no balloons, no welcome signs, no realtor smiling with a bottle of cheap champagne. Just me, the click of a lock, and the creak of a new beginning. The front door groaned slightly as it opened, honest wood against honest hinges. I stepped inside and let the silence wrap around me like a familiar coat. Hardwood floors stretched out in honeyed tones. White trim lined the windows. A fireplace waited quietly at the far end of the living room, as if it had been holding its breath all this time. I ran my hand along the wall as I walked deeper into the house. This one was mine, every inch of it. Not a single synode to anyone but me. No staged furniture. No polished photos of couples hugging with sold signs. No lingering ghost of a marriage built on illusion. Just fresh paint and quiet air and the soft, rhythmic thump of my boots crossing into rooms that would finally echo with truth. The kitchen smelled faintly of new laminate and lemon cleaner. There was no island, no wine fridge, no Instagrammable granite countertops, but there was space. Honest space. A place to sit at the table with no lies between bites. I imagined future mornings, me, coffee in hand, sun cutting through the kitchen blinds like gold blades. No more pretending. No more playing the background character in someone else's curated dream. I walked through the hallway, hands skimming across the cool surface of the walls, imagining how I'd fill the place. A dark green couch. Bookshelves made from reclaimed wood. A record player in the corner. None of it flashy. All of it mine. Upstairs, the master bedroom faced the east, the windows opening to a view of trees and sky, and not much else. I stood there for a while, watching the wind play through the branches. I thought about how quiet peace could be. Not loud like revenge. Not heavy like grief. Just still. The bathroom was small, but it had a window, and I liked that. I had spent years getting ready in a house where everything was polished but suffocating. This place had light. Room to breathe. After I finished walking through every room, I circled back downstairs and stepped out onto the wraparound porch. The wood was solid beneath my feet, the kind of porch built to hold rocking chairs and late-night talks. I took a seat on the top step and let the hush of the neighborhood settle in. A breeze rolled by. Leaves rustled. A bird landed on the fence across the yard. Nothing spectacular. But it felt like life exhaled with me. 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps on the gravel path leading to my front yard. I looked up to see a woman, maybe late 60s, gray hair pulled into a loose bun. walking toward me with a pie in hand. She wore a soft cardigan and jeans that had seen better decades. "You must be the new owner," she said, smiling like someone who'd baked her way through harder times. "I'm Marcia. I live just over there." She pointed to the house across the street. I stood up and offered my hand. "Julian. Julian Rowe. It's nice to meet you." She handed me the pie, still warm, wrapped in a checkered cloth. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Julian." "Starting over." I nodded, holding her gaze. "Yeah, and this time, it's for me." She didn't pry, just patted my arm and said, "Well, it's a good place for that." Then she turned and walked back across the road, giving me a small wave before disappearing into her porch. I sat back down and set the pie beside me. It smelled like cinnamon and something else I couldn't place, something old, comforting, real. I didn't call anyone that night. Didn't post a photo. Didn't text friends with the address or ask for housewarming gifts. I didn't need witnesses to this moment. The proof was in the silence, in the key still warm from my hand, in the door that opened without hesitation. Later, I unpacked a few things, just the basics. Clothes, a toolbox, some books. I didn't rush. There was no deadline now, no pressure to create a narrative. This house didn't need to impress anyone. It just needed to hold me. As I set my books on a makeshift shelf, I found an old journal I hadn't opened in years. Flipping through it, I stopped at a page I'd written early in my marriage to Celia. The handwriting was neat, almost hopeful. "One day, we'll have a home that's ours. Built with love. With time. With something that can't be bought or faked." I closed the journal slowly. That dream hadn't died. It had just taken a detour through hell. And now, here I was, on the other side. That night, I made a simple dinner, eggs and toast, nothing fancy. I sat at my bare kitchen table, a dim lamp humming above me, and ate in silence. Not lonely silence, just peace. The kind I hadn't known I was starving for. Before bed, I stepped out onto the porch again. The stars were faint but visible, scattered like quiet witnesses across the sky. I leaned against the post, took a long breath, and let everything fall away, the lies, the betrayal, the courtroom echo. All of it. Here, I wasn't the man who'd been stolen from. I was the man who had rebuilt. I locked the door behind me not out of fear, but because I finally had something worth protecting again. My peace. My home. My name. And all of it, finally, was mine. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when the envelope arrived. No return address, just my name scrawled in blocky handwriting across the front. The paper was damp at the corners from the drizzle that had crept in through the mailbox flap, but the seal held. I stood in the doorway of my new home, keys dangling from one hand, coffee in the other, and stared at it like it might explode. I knew who it was from before I even opened it. There was no stamp of legal importance. No forwarding label from a lawyer's office or correctional facility. Just a quiet, deliberate message from someone who had vanished without confrontation, without closure. I slipped my thumb under the flap and tore it open slowly, letting the weight of it settle. One sheet of paper. One sentence. "You win." That was it. No signature. No explanation. No apology. Just 3 words, written in ink that had bled slightly at the edges, like even the rain couldn't stand the message. I didn't laugh, not right away. I just stood there in the quiet of my entryway, the storm tapping against the windows like a memory trying to find a way back in. I read the words again, as if maybe there was more hidden in them. But there wasn't. Celia had finally run out of performances. I set the note down on the entry table beside the ceramic bowl where I now dropped my keys and loose change. Then I took my coffee and walked into the living room. The fireplace flickered low, gas, not wood, but it was enough to give the room warmth. The same warmth I hadn't felt in years. It hit me then, not the letter itself, but the truth it confirmed. It was over. Completely, undeniably over. No more legal battles. No more lies. No more waking up to the dread of sharing a roof with a stranger wearing my wife's face. That small note, scribbled in quiet defeat, wasn't just a message. It was a surrender. And it was my peace treaty. So yes, eventually, I did laugh. But not out of spite. Not out of revenge. It was relief. It was freedom. Celia's final act wasn't a confession or a plea for forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement. She had tried to ruin me. She failed. And now, even she knew it. I leaned back on the couch, my eyes drifting toward the ceiling as the rain thickened outside. The storm didn't feel ominous. It felt cleansing. Like the final rinse after a long, dirty war. Somewhere out there, Celia was living in a guest room in Ohio, her dreams reduced to a mattress against a pale wall and the memory of a plan that backfired spectacularly. Her boyfriend had ghosted her the minute the charges landed. Her reputation, once pristine in the curated world she worshipped, was scorched. People didn't say her name with admiration anymore. They whispered it like a warning. And me? I had my house, my solitude, my sanity. I had neighbors who waved instead of whispered. A schedule that didn't revolve around someone else's needs. Meals I cooked for myself, in a kitchen that no longer felt like a stage. I had air that I could breathe fully. And I had sleep. Real, uninterrupted sleep. The kind that doesn't come with clenched jaws and dreams filled with doubt. It hadn't been easy getting here. There were nights in that hotel room where I doubted everything, where I asked myself if maybe I was being too paranoid, if I was imagining the betrayal. There were days in court where I felt like the villain just for defending myself, days where Celia's crocodile tears made me look cold and calculated. But I had made it through, and more than that, I had rebuilt, without cutting corners or compromising who I was. For once, I had stayed true to myself, and that was a win bigger than any legal victory. The letter still sat on the entry table. I didn't move to throw it away. Not yet. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I wanted to remember what it cost me to earn it. Every relationship changes you. Some teach you love. Some teach you loss. Celia taught me to listen to the silence, to trust my instincts, to never confuse presence with partnership. I used to think love was measured in gifts and vacations and curated smiles. Now I knew better. Love is quiet consistency. Love is respect when no one's watching. Love is truth over convenience. I stood and walked to the window, watching the storm pour down over the yard. The garden hadn't taken shape yet. It was mostly dirt and potential. But I liked it that way. There was something honest about unplanted soil. It held space for what was next. In time, I'd plant tomatoes, maybe peppers, maybe a fig tree. Not because it would impress anyone, but because it was something that took root slowly and gave back with patience. I liked that idea. Things that grow because they're nurtured, not because they're forced. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Marcia, my neighbor from across the street, standing under a yellow umbrella with another pie in hand. "Rainy day pie," she said with a shrug. "Old habit." I chuckled and stepped aside. "Come in. Let me put on some coffee." She walked in like she'd been here a dozen times already, comfortable and kind. "Still settling in?" "Getting there," I said. "Feels more like home every day." She set the pie down and gave me a long look. "You've got peace in your eyes now," she said. "Didn't have that when you moved in." I nodded slowly. "Took a while to earn." She smiled. "The good ones always do." We sat with coffee and pie while the storm danced on the windows, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no need to explain myself to anyone. The war was over. The masks were off. And the life I had now? It was quiet, but it was mine. Later that night, after the dishes were cleaned and Marcia had returned to her warm, lit porch across the street, I picked up the letter one last time. "You win." I read it again. Then I folded it neatly and slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes the people who try to break you are the very ones who push you toward the life you were always meant to live. Thank you, Celia, for your cruelty, for your betrayal, and for finally setting me free.